It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. On a warm summer afternoon in 1985, Mark and Lisa Burnett stood hand in hand beneath a blooming oak tree just outside the small town of Ashton, Oregon. Surrounded by friends and family, the high school sweethearts exchanged vows, rings, and smiles full of dreams. The ceremony wasn't extravagant, but it was heartfelt. Every detail reflected who they were: simple, kind, deeply in love. Locals still remember how Lisa laughed when her veil got caught in the wind and how Mark's hands trembled as he read his vows. That day was captured in dozens of photos, a few grainy camcorder recordings, and the hearts of everyone who attended. But within just 24 hours of saying "I do," Mark and Lisa were gone. They vanished without a trace. Their wedding reception ended just before sunset. The couple had planned a modest honeymoon, just a few days camping in the Willamette National Forest. They packed up their gear, waved goodbye, and drove off in their tan 1979 Chevrolet Suburban. That was the last confirmed sighting of them. Days passed with no word. At first, friends thought they might have simply extended their honeymoon. But when Lisa didn't call her sister on her birthday, and Mark didn't show up for work at the hardware store, a feeling of unease started to creep in. When a week went by with no contact, Lisa's mother called the sheriff. A search began almost immediately. Helicopters scanned forest trails. Volunteers combed through dense trees. Park rangers checked campsites, trail logs, and ranger stations. But there was nothing. No abandoned car. No personal items. No footprints. Not even a tire track. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. The couple's disappearance shook the quiet town of Ashton to its core. Rumors swirled quickly. Some believed they'd run off to start a new life, maybe in Canada or somewhere down south. Others whispered darker theories, talk of foul play, hidden secrets, or someone at the wedding with a grudge. But no evidence ever surfaced to support any of it. Police kept the case open, but as years passed, the search grew colder. The forest remained silent. And eventually, so did the town. By 1990, their case was just another file in the back of the sheriff's dusty cabinet. The Burnett family, heartbroken and helpless, continued to hope, but the hope grew dimmer each year. Lisa's parents moved out of Ashton in '92, unable to bear the empty silence. Mark's younger brother, Adam, joined the military and stopped talking about his missing sibling. No one wanted to admit it, but many had already assumed the worst. Then, in the spring of 1997, to 12 years after that joyful wedding, everything changed. It began with a college student named Sarah Klein, working on a geography project that involved analyzing satellite imagery of the Pacific Northwest. She wasn't looking for missing people, just topographical changes. While reviewing a patch of forest near Crater Lake, she noticed something odd. A faint, rectangular shape in a clearing that hadn't been marked on any maps. It was almost perfectly straight, too straight to be natural. Curious, she flagged it in her notes and sent it along to her professor, who forwarded it to the local forestry department. No one thought much of it at the time. But when forestry teams sent a drone to survey the area, things got strange. The shape wasn't just a shadow or fallen trees. It was metal, rusted, buried beneath a thick layer of moss and leaves. The outline matched the dimensions of a vehicle. Specifically, something large, like a Suburban. Still, authorities weren't quick to jump to conclusions. It could have been an old ranger vehicle, a logging truck, or even debris from a long-forgotten crash. But as news of the finding made its way to Ashton, the name Burnett was spoken again for the first time in years. Sheriff Pete Holloway, who had just joined the department in '85 and remembered the case vividly, decided to reopen the investigation. He organized a ground search of the area shown in the satellite photo. The terrain was difficult, thick underbrush, steep slopes, unpredictable weather. But on the third day, they found it. The vehicle was nearly intact, though heavily deteriorated. Branches had grown through the wheel wells. Windows were shattered. The license plate, though barely legible, matched Mark Burnett's missing Suburban. Inside were fragments of camping supplies, an old stove, a torn sleeping bag, and a melted flashlight. But there was something else too. Something that sent chills down the spines of the search team. On the passenger seat sat a faded wedding invitation, warped by moisture but unmistakably theirs. The names Mark and Lisa Burnett still visible in delicate calligraphy. That discovery reopened a dozen old wounds and twice as many questions. What happened to the newlyweds after they drove into the forest? Did they crash? Were they stranded? Or was someone else involved, someone who didn't want them found? And if this was their car, where were they? No bodies were recovered at the site. No sign of human remains. No blood. Just the eerie stillness of a forest that had kept its secret for over a decade. The satellite image had solved one mystery but sparked an even deeper one. Investigators now had a new search area, but time had eroded much of the evidence. The weather, animals, and nature itself had likely scattered whatever clues might have been left behind. Still, one thing was now certain: Mark and Lisa had made it into the forest. But what happened next remained a mystery. As word of the discovery spread, national media picked up the story. Headlines read, "Vanished newlyweds vehicle found after 12 years." News crews came to Ashton, interviewing old friends, family members, and wedding guests. Everyone had a theory, but no one had answers. Lisa's childhood friend recalled her saying she had a bad feeling the night before the wedding, but no one had taken it seriously. Mark's coworker claimed he saw the groom talking to a stranger at the gas station the morning they left. But again, no proof, no names, just fragments of fading memory. Even stranger still, satellite analysts noticed something else in the same area, a second shape, deeper in the woods, almost completely camouflaged. The image wasn't clear enough to confirm what it was, but its symmetry suggested it wasn't natural. Search teams began preparing to explore the area. Hopes were high that it could bring answers. Maybe a campsite, a shelter, or something far more unsettling. And just as the crews were ready to head out, another discovery came in. One that would change everything again and prove that this mystery was far from over. What they found next wasn't just a clue. It was a message. And it would lead investigators down a trail. The forest around Crater Lake was quiet that morning when the new search team set out. Fog clung low to the moss-covered ground, and the sun barely broke through the thick branches overhead. Every step the crew took seemed to echo in the stillness, as if the woods themselves were listening. Led by Sheriff Holloway, now grayer and slower than he was in 1985, the team carried maps, gear, and that same eerie photo from the satellite, showing what appeared to be a second man-made shape deeper in the woods. No one said it out loud, but everyone wondered the same thing. Was this where Mark and Lisa ended up? Even after all these years, there were still so many unanswered questions. The discovery of the car had only added more layers to the mystery. How had it ended up so deep in the forest, untouched for more than a decade? The area wasn't part of any official trail, and no one had logged or hunted there for years. Local hikers avoided it too. Some called it the Hollow, a name passed around in town with a kind of quiet discomfort. Even animals seemed to steer clear of that patch of forest. It was the kind of place you only heard about in whispers. Back in town, old memories were stirring again. People who had been at the wedding began digging out photo albums, trying to remember details they hadn't thought about in years. Lisa's cousin Rachel recalled something strange. At the reception, Lisa had gone missing for almost half an hour. When she came back, her smile was different, tight, uneasy. She didn't say where she'd gone. Mark noticed too. One photo even captured the moment they reunited. Mark is smiling, but Lisa is turned slightly, her eyes locked on something out of frame. Sheriff Holloway had the photo pinned on his office wall now, next to the satellite printout. He'd spend hours staring at it. Something about the way Lisa looked. It wasn't fear, but it wasn't peace either. He'd been young when the case began, barely out of training. He remembered how the whole town had clung to hope back then. Now, he was determined to finish what he'd started. As the new search party moved closer to the coordinates from the satellite, the ground began to change. What had started as soft moss gave way to patches of scorched earth, odd, considering there hadn't been a wildfire in that area in decades. One team member noted how the trees in that part of the forest were bent oddly, as if something large had passed through them years ago. But there was no path, no cut brush, nothing that suggested anyone or anything had cleared a trail. Then came the second discovery. About half a mile from the car, hidden beneath a tangle of branches and wild ivy, they found the remains of a collapsed structure. It was hard to tell what it had been at first, maybe a cabin or a shack. Pieces of rotted wood were scattered like bones, and a rusted lantern hung from what was once a doorframe. Near one corner, someone found a decayed leather bag. Inside were two things: a cracked Polaroid camera and a rolled-up map, water-damaged and half-faded, but still showing part of the forest. In the bottom corner of the map was a name scribbled in faint pencil, W. Ellis. No one recognized the name right away, but it didn't take long before someone made the connection. Walter Ellis had once owned a parcel of land in that same area back in the 1970s. A Vietnam veteran and survivalist, he'd built a cabin in the woods to get away from society. Locals called him Wild Walt. He rarely came into town and didn't talk much when he did. In 1984, just a year before the wedding, his property was foreclosed and he vanished without notice. Some folks assumed he'd gone further off the grid or passed away. No one had heard from him since. Suddenly, people were asking new questions. Did Mark and Lisa cross paths with Ellis? Was his cabin their intended destination? And if it was, why? Did they know him? Digging into old county records, Sheriff Holloway found something else, a receipt for a camping permit issued to Mark Burnett just 2 weeks before the wedding. But the location he marked on the permit wasn't any official campsite. It was the same rough area where the cabin once stood. This detail had been missed during the original investigation, buried beneath stacks of unrelated paperwork. But now it seemed to matter a lot more. Friends and family insisted Mark had never mentioned any survivalist or ex-soldier, and Lisa wasn't the kind of person to plan a remote trip without telling someone. It didn't add up. And yet, the permit had Mark's signature. And even more troubling, the handwriting didn't match samples from his high school records. Forensics would need to confirm, but Holloway had a sinking feeling that someone else had signed that permit in Mark's name. As the investigation deepened, the mystery began to touch more lives. A retired dispatcher came forward with a strange call she remembered from the night of the wedding. It was short and scratchy, full of static, but she swore it was Lisa's voice. She was crying, scared, and kept repeating something about the trees and "we need to leave." The call had been dismissed at the time, chalked up to pranksters, but now it sounded chillingly real. That recording had never been saved, but the woman's memory was sharp. She remembered the exact time, 11:48 p.m. Mark and Lisa were supposed to have arrived at their campsite by then. But if that was Lisa's voice, it meant something had gone terribly wrong not long after they left the reception. The deeper everyone looked, the more questions arose. Why hadn't any of the search teams found the cabin in 1985 if it was so close to where the car was discovered? Why had Ellis vanished? And what did Lisa mean when she said the trees? A team of investigators went back to the site with ground-penetrating radar, hoping to find anything: personal items, signs of a struggle, remains. What they found instead were signs of digging. Old digging. A pit, long filled in, near what used to be the cabin's foundation. Its edges were square, deliberate. Someone had dug there, then carefully covered it up. The earth was different, compacted, layered. It would take hours to dig it back out. As night fell and fog began to roll in again, the team marked the area and prepared to return at first light. Sheriff Holloway stayed behind for a few moments, staring at the pit. He didn't say much, but those with him could see it in his eyes. He knew whatever was buried there was important. Maybe it would explain everything. Or maybe it would raise more questions than anyone was ready for. Back in Ashton, townspeople waited anxiously for news. Old rumors were surfacing again, about Ellis, about strange lights seen in the woods that summer, about another couple who had gone missing from a neighboring town in the 70s under similar circumstances. The patterns were too odd to ignore. And just before midnight, as Holloway's radio crackled to life with a garbled voice from the site, the last few words sent a chill down everyone's spine. "Sheriff, you're going to want to see this. We found something." But what they found, beneath that quiet soil, buried for over a decade, would send the case spiraling into territory no one had imagined. And the truth, when it finally came to light, would make everything they thought they knew feel like a lie. Annie was prepared for. To find out what the satellite revealed next, and the chilling truth it exposed, stay with us. The story is only just beginning. The hole wasn't wide, maybe 4 feet across, but the way the search crew stood around it made it feel like a crater. As the sun began to rise behind the thick trees, mist settled along the ground like a warning. Sheriff Holloway crouched beside the edge, his breath visible in the chilly morning air. He didn't speak right away. One of the younger deputies, Tanner, stood next to him, holding a small object in a plastic bag. It looked like a wedding ring, dulled with age but still intact. Inside the pit, buried about 2 feet below the surface, were fragments of what used to be a wooden crate, old fabric, and the unmistakable curve of human remains. But the strange part was the way the body had been buried. It wasn't haphazard or rushed. Whoever did this had taken their time. The bones were laid out neatly, arms crossed over the chest, a single black feather resting on what used to be the rib cage. There were no signs of trauma, at least none visible at first glance. No bullet holes. No fractures. Just silence. The coroner would need to confirm, but Holloway already felt it in his gut. This wasn't just a random burial. It was deliberate, ritualistic, almost like a message. Back in town, word spread fast, too fast. By mid-morning, a small group of reporters had parked outside the sheriff's office. Some locals stood nearby, whispering about old legends and odd disappearances. A woman named Diane Melrose came forward. She'd worked as a housekeeper for Lisa Burnett's family in the early 80s. Quiet, reserved, never one to get involved. But now, decades later, she had something to say. Diane remembered Lisa receiving letters in the months before her wedding. Handwritten, no return address. She never showed them to anyone, but Diane had seen the look on Lisa's face after reading one, pale, distant, like her mind was somewhere else. One day, Lisa even asked her, "Do you believe people can be warned?" Diane hadn't known what to say. She just nodded and changed the subject. At the time, she thought it was wedding stress. But now she wasn't so sure. Sheriff Holloway brought Diane in for a formal interview. She couldn't remember the exact words, but she did remember the last thing Lisa ever said to her. "If something happens, it's not an accident." Meanwhile, forensic analysis on the ring confirmed what everyone feared. It belonged to Mark Burnett. But the remains weren't his. DNA from an old hairbrush Lisa's mother had kept in storage was used for comparison. The results were shocking. The remains were Lisa's, which meant the mystery wasn't just about where they disappeared to, but why only one of them had ended up buried in a hidden grave while the other was still missing. What's more, the body had no shoes, and nearby they found a child's toy, a wooden whistle carved in the shape of a bird. It wasn't something Lisa had ever been known to carry, but when shown to a few of the wedding guests from that night, one man recognized it. Greg Holman, a distant cousin of Mark's, had seen something like it years ago at Walter Ellis's cabin. Suddenly, all eyes turned to Ellis again. A deeper dive into Ellis's past revealed even more disturbing connections. Before moving to Oregon, Ellis had lived in Northern California, near a town where, in 1976, a couple had vanished during a camping trip. Their car had been found abandoned near a riverbank, their belongings untouched. Nothing ever came of the case, but one detail stuck out. Searchers had found a black feather tied with red thread to a tree near their last known location. The same kind of feather now found with Lisa's body. Ellis had never been officially linked to any crime. No record. No charges. But he'd been in the area, and he'd owned land exactly where Lisa was found. Digging through Ellis's old cabin ruins, the search crew uncovered a rusted lockbox hidden beneath a false floorboard. Inside were more letters. Some addressed to him, some just marked with strange symbols. They were hard to read, written in a messy, almost manic hand, with references to the Watchers, the hollow voice, and the promise of the bride. The language was rambling but dark, like someone slowly losing their grip. One line repeated often, one stays, one walks. Holloway didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was becoming harder to ignore the possibility that Lisa and Mark had crossed paths with someone dangerous. Whether it was Ellis or someone else wasn't certain yet. But the idea that this was a planned act, not an accident or a lost trail, was growing stronger by the day. As forensic teams combed through the area, they found another strange detail. Tucked behind a tree stump near the burial site was a set of old photographs, wrapped in wax paper. The photos were faded but still visible. They showed a younger Mark and Lisa before the wedding, but the locations were unfamiliar. In one photo, they stood near a cave opening. In another, Lisa stood alone, staring into the trees, her expression blank. None of the pictures had been seen before by family or friends. No one even knew they had visited such places. There were more questions than ever now. Who took the photos? Why were they hidden? And where was Mark? The mystery wasn't just haunting Ashton anymore. It was pulling in people from all over the region. Online forums picked up the story. Armchair detectives dissected every piece of evidence. Some believed Ellis had created a secret cult in the woods. Others were convinced Lisa and Mark stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see: illegal dumping, poachers, or something worse. A few even suggested supernatural explanations, pointing to old native legends about spirits that haunted the deep woods, luring people in with whispers. Sheriff Holloway didn't have time for ghost stories, but even he admitted that the details were unsettling. The buried whistle, the feather, the letters, the untouched Suburban. And now, one more twist. The original satellite image, the one that led to the car, had been re-examined by a private geospatial analyst who offered to help. Using enhanced imaging techniques, he found something even deeper in the woods. A heat signature. Faint, irregular, but definitely not natural. Possibly a heat source coming from underground. It was nearly a mile away from where Lisa had been found. Holloway ordered a new search team to check it out, but weather conditions made it difficult. Heavy rains were forecasted, and the area was prone to landslides. Still, they planned to push in within 48 hours. The hope was to find another shelter, or maybe even Mark. Back in town, Adam Burnett returned for the first time in over a decade. Mark's younger brother, hardened by years in the military, had always refused to believe his brother simply disappeared. Now, seeing the case reopen with real developments, he was ready to dig into the past himself. He met with Holloway privately, asking to see everything: photos, letters, maps. Adam believed someone at the wedding knew more than they admitted. Maybe not directly involved, but aware of something odd. He started calling former guests, tracking their movements after the wedding, making quiet notes of inconsistencies in their stories. One thing that struck him: one guest, a man named Paul Beckett, had been seated at the same table as Lisa during the reception while Mark was talking with the band. No one had thought much of it. But when Adam looked into Paul's background, he discovered something odd. Paul had changed his name in 1983, 2 years before the wedding. His original name? Richard Ellis, Walter Ellis's nephew. The coincidence was too big to ignore. Adam brought this to Holloway, and the sheriff agreed to bring Paul, now Richard, in for questioning. But when they went in his home just outside Salem, he was gone. Left the house 2 days earlier and hadn't been seen since. Now, things were spinning faster than anyone could keep up with. Lisa was dead. Mark was still missing. A hidden burial, strange writings, possible ties to other vanishings, and now a man with a new name who may have been watching them the whole time. And in the woods, just beyond where the trail ends, that faint heat signal still flickered in the darkness, waiting to be discovered. Whatever lay ahead, it was clear now, this story was far from over. The rain came down in steady sheets, soaking through jackets and pooling in the worn paths carved by search boots and equipment wheels. The forest groaned under the weight of it, the wind whistling through the trees like a breath held too long. Still, Sheriff Holloway stood at the edge of the new site, staring into the tangled underbrush where the satellite heat signature had been marked. It was deep, deeper than anyone had guessed. They'd had to bring in heavier tools just to cut through the thick roots and fallen trees. But even through the storm, the ground here felt wrong. Like something buried didn't want to be uncovered. Tensions were high. Everyone knew this part of the search felt different. They had Lisa's body, Ellis's strange writings, and the disturbing truth about Richard, Paul Beckett, who hadn't been seen in days. Now the satellite data suggested something else was still out there. A presence, maybe even a person. Some still held on to the hope that Mark was alive, hidden, or trapped somehow. But most weren't so sure anymore. Too much time had passed, and the clues had only grown darker. Adam Burnett hadn't left the sheriff's side since he got into town. Even soaked to the bone, he refused to go back to the hotel. His brother was still out there somewhere, and he wasn't about to miss the moment they found him. He hadn't slept properly in days. The way he talked had changed too. There was a tension behind his eyes, like he was starting to realize that answers might not bring peace, only more questions. As the crew pushed forward through the undergrowth, they reached a natural depression in the land, almost bowl-shaped, surrounded by gnarled trees with bare limbs twisted toward the sky. In the middle was a mound of earth, not quite natural but not recent either. Moss and branches covered it like it had been sleeping for years. They marked the perimeter, set up lights, and started digging. The deeper they went, the stranger it got. First came more feathers, black, tied with old red string. Then, bits of rusted tools, bones that turned out to be animal remains, and a collapsed wooden plank with carved markings. The design wasn't random. It looked like a symbol, something circular, spiraling inward like a maze. It matched one of the sketches found in Ellis's hidden lockbox. Then someone's shovel struck metal. Everyone froze. Holloway leaned in, helping to clear the dirt. What they uncovered was the top of a large, reinforced hatch, like something from an old storm shelter. The locking mechanism was rusted but intact, the hinges sealed with layers of clay and sap. It didn't make sense. Why would there be something man-made so deep out here, far beyond where anyone lived? Adam stepped forward. "Open it," he said. "He's in there." "I know it." The crew hesitated, but Holloway nodded. They worked for nearly an hour in the cold and rain, chipping away at the seal. Finally, with a loud creak, the hatch gave way and swung open. A blast of musty, stale air rolled out. Flashlights cut through the darkness inside, revealing a steep staircase that led underground. No one spoke for a moment. Then Holloway clicked on his radio and said quietly, "We're going in." The air was thick and dry inside the bunker, the walls reinforced with old concrete and wood. The deeper they went, the more oppressive it felt. Like the space wasn't just abandoned, it was waiting. Old tools lined the walls, some covered in cobwebs. There were jars of food, expired decades ago, and shelves stacked with books, maps, and notebooks. The temperature dropped the further they went. No one knew how far the bunker extended. The satellite only picked up heat, not depth. About 40 feet in, they found a room. Inside was a small cot, a burned-out lantern, and more of those carved bird whistles. Dozens of them. Some half-finished. Others stacked neatly, as if part of a routine. On the wall were scratched words. "One stays. One walks. One stays. One walks." Adam stared at the wall, gripping the edge of a table for support. "He was here," he said. "I can feel it." But then a noise broke the silence. A faint tapping, echoing through the tunnel. Everyone turned toward the hallway, weapons drawn, flashlights aimed. "Hello," Holloway called out. "If anyone's down here, come out." No response. Just the tapping. Slow. Deliberate. They followed it deeper. The tunnel curved sharply, then opened into a larger space, like a second chamber. What they found made everyone stop cold. On the far wall was a photo, an enlarged copy of Lisa and Mark's wedding picture, nailed to a wooden board. Surrounding it were candles, long since burned out, and more feathers. On the floor beneath the photo were 2 pairs of shoes. One was Lisa's, confirmed by her mother later. The other was a man's, possibly Mark's. Between them was a sealed metal box. Adam knelt and opened it. Inside were personal items, Lisa's old necklace, a letter addressed to M, and a worn cassette tape labeled "Listen." There was also a faded ID card, Mark's driver's license. It was water-damaged but real. Someone whispered, "He was here." They played the tape later, back at the sheriff's office. The voice on it was Mark's. "If you're hearing this," he said, "then I didn't make it out. I'm sorry, Lisa. I tried." But he said only one could leave. He said it was a deal. A promise. I thought I could outsmart him. I thought we could both run. But I was wrong. He paused. The next part was quieter. "He watches from the trees." He said I had to choose. I stayed. She walked. There was a click, and the tape ended. Back at the site, the rain hadn't let up. The air around the bunker felt heavier now. No one wanted to say it, but everyone felt it. Something had happened down there. Something they still didn't fully understand. As night fell, another update came in. One of the tech teams rescanned the satellite data and discovered something missed earlier, a second heat signature, smaller, closer to town. It had only started showing up in the past 2 days. Movement. Possibly someone hiding. Sheriff Holloway ordered a team to investigate immediately. They followed the signal into an abandoned property near the edge of Ashton, once owned by Walter Ellis's brother. The house had been empty for years. When they broke inside, they found signs someone had been squatting there. Empty food cans, bedding, and in the basement, an old radio transmitter, still running. And in the corner, under a tarp, was a backpack. Inside was the original map with Ellis's notes, and a copy of the wedding invitation from 1985. Whoever had been there was gone, but they had been watching, listening, maybe even nearby during the search. And they might still be out there. The realization settled over the team like a chill. Who was Richard really? Had he taken something from Ellis? Or had Ellis passed something on to him, some twisted belief? Did Mark really make a deal? Or had someone made the choice for him? As the town held its breath, waiting for answers, one thing had become clear. This wasn't just about a missing couple anymore. It was about a deeper, older pattern. Something hidden just beneath the surface, wrapped in whispers, buried in moss, and watching from the trees. And the final truth, whatever it was now only steps away. The house had been quiet for years. Dust blanketed the furniture, spiderwebs stretched across cracked picture frames, and the windows were so caked with grime they barely let the morning light in. But it was the silence that got to Holloway, the kind of silence that hummed beneath your skin, like something was listening. As the deputies combed through the old Ellis property, it was clear whoever had been staying here had left in a hurry. Half-eaten food on the counter, a coat draped over a chair, a flashlight with warm batteries. Someone had known they were coming. Or worse, had been watching them all along. In the basement, Holloway stood staring at the radio transmitter, still active, its signal bouncing off quiet static. A second frequency pulsed softly in the background. The tech team hadn't deciphered it yet, but it didn't match any local law enforcement channels. Someone had set this up intentionally. Maybe it was a communication system. Or maybe it was a lure. Adam had gone quiet after seeing the wedding invitation in the backpack. It was a perfect copy of the original, aged just enough to look real. But when he held it up to the light, a faint symbol appeared under the print, the same spiraling shape found carved into the boards beneath the bunker. This wasn't coincidence. It was planned. Someone had embedded this long before anyone realized. Back at the station, Holloway pulled out an old file, one that hadn't been opened in decades. It was a 1982 missing persons case, buried deep because the man was presumed to have walked away willingly. No foul play. No evidence of a struggle. His name was Jonah Wills, a cartographer who had worked for a private land surveying company operating along the Oregon-Washington border. His final project involved mapping off-grid sections of forest land. Before disappearing, he filed a report filled with erratic notes, symbols, phrases, references to fractured space and looping time. At the time, people thought he had a breakdown. But now, Holloway wasn't so sure. One phrase from the report matched the carvings found in the Ellis bunker exactly. The spiral marks the door. The twist came when Holloway pulled Jonah's personnel file. In the emergency contact section was a sister, Marlene Wills. But the address wasn't familiar. It was listed as a P.O. box in Ashton. A quick record search showed that same P.O. box was still active and had been accessed recently. Even stranger, it was registered under a different name. Richard Ellis. Holloway and Adam drove out to the post office without alerting anyone else. They didn't want to risk tipping off whoever was still playing this twisted game. When they got there, they waited until after hours, then quietly asked the clerk to open the box. Inside were more letters. Handwritten, dated monthly, all addressed to someone named J. Each letter followed a similar structure. A greeting, a passage describing some sort of memory, and then a closing line that chilled them both. The gate holds, but the cycle weakens. One stays, one walks. Adam felt the weight of those words in his chest. It wasn't just a phrase anymore. It was something passed down, something believed. As they left the post office, Holloway's phone buzzed. It was Deputy Tanner, back at the search site near the underground bunker. They'd found something else, something buried beneath the second chamber. A crawlspace, sealed behind rotting boards. Inside was a journal, wrapped in oilcloth. It wasn't Ellis's handwriting this time. It was Lisa's. The pages were fragile, the ink faded in parts, but the words were hers. The first entry was dated just 3 days after the wedding. In it, she described waking up alone in a small wooden room, unsure of how she got there. She wrote about strange sounds outside, footsteps that never came close, voices that whispered without breath. Over the next several entries, it became clear she had been held there. By who, she didn't know. But she referenced him. Not Ellis, not Mark. Just him. One passage stood out. Lisa wrote, "He says the forest chose me. That I'm the tether. That if I don't walk, the cycle breaks and the watchers awaken. I don't know what that means. I just want to go home. Further down, she mentioned Mark. He tried to come back for me. I saw him through the trees. He was calling my name. But the man stopped him. Said the gate only opens once. Said if he crossed, we'd both be lost. I screamed until my voice broke. I don't know if he heard me. The last entry was dated 6 months later. I think the forest is different now. Colder. The man hasn't come in days. Maybe he's gone. Maybe I'm next. If someone finds this, tell my mother I wore her earrings. I wanted to feel her close one last time. Adam turned away, unable to hide the tears. Lisa hadn't just vanished, she'd suffered. She'd waited. And something had kept her trapped. But now, there was another question. Where had Mark gone? That night, Holloway received a call from a retired detective in southern Washington. He'd caught wind of the reopened Burnett case on the news and had a strange connection to share. Back in 1993, a man matching Mark's description had turned up in a small mountain town near Mount Adams. He checked into a roadside motel under the name M. Ellis and stayed for 4 days. Locals remembered him being quiet, skittish, like he was watching for someone. Then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he vanished. The detective had taken a statement from the motel clerk at the time. The man had paid in cash and left behind a single item, a photo. It was a picture of Lisa, taped to the inside of the mirror. If it really was Mark, it meant he survived, at least for a while. And then something else surfaced. That same week, an amateur hiker posted a video online from a trail not far from Ashton. In the background, someone caught a figure moving behind the trees. Tall, thin, dressed in a dark coat. The hiker zoomed in, and just for a split second, the figure turned to face the camera. Adam nearly dropped his phone when he saw the frame. It looked like Mark. Older, beard unkempt, eyes hollow, but unmistakably Mark. Now, the timeline no longer made sense. If Lisa had died years ago, and Mark had been seen long after, where had he gone? And why hadn't he come forward? The theory forming in Holloway's mind made his skin crawl. What if Mark hadn't escaped the forest? What if he still hadn't? What if whoever was seen in that video wasn't trying to hide, but was trapped, reliving something, caught in a loop like the writings had warned? The cycle weakens. The phrase echoed over and over. They were no longer just dealing with a case of disappearance. They were chasing the edges of something deeper, something ancient, some part of the land that didn't want to let go. And with every piece they uncovered, one truth became clearer. Whatever started in 1985 wasn't finished yet. The forest was darker than usual that night. The sky was thick with clouds, and not even the moonlight could break through. Adam stood at the edge of the tree line, his breath rising in thin wisps, flashlight in hand, heart pounding like a warning drum in his chest. Sheriff Holloway was beside him, calm but tense. Behind them, a team of searchers waited silently, the video stills from the hikers' footage clutched in one hand, old maps in the other. They had followed the sightings, traced the movement, compared every blurred figure in the trees to Mark's old photos. Every lead had brought them closer to this, an unmarked trail, not found on any official registry, leading deep into the northern side of the forest where no search party had ever been. But someone had been here. The dirt was disturbed, the undergrowth broken. Tracks that looked weeks old were oddly perfect, like someone kept retracing the same path over and over again. They walked for nearly an hour before the forest changed. The trees grew taller and tighter, the bark darker. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets, owls, wind, faded until only footsteps remained. It was as if they'd crossed into somewhere else entirely. Then, through the trees, they saw it. A cabin. Old, rotting, and nearly consumed by the forest. Moss hung from the roof, vines pulled at the shutters, and the front door leaned off its hinges. No one spoke. Adam took the first step forward, pushing the door open slowly. The inside smelled of damp wood and ash. There was a fireplace with long dead embers, a table set with 2 mismatched plates, and on the far wall, photos. Their wedding photo, Lisa's childhood pictures, a snapshot of the Burnett brothers as kids, laughing with ice cream cones in hand. Someone had built a shrine here, a memory wall. At the center of it all was a name scratched into the wood over and over again, Mark. And then came the creak of floorboards above. They looked up. Sheriff Holloway motioned for silence and climbed the stairs slowly, gun drawn. Adam followed, every step tighter than the last. At the top of the stairs was a narrow hallway and a single door, slightly ajar. Inside, a man sat by the window. Hair long and gray, body thin but upright, face gaunt yet familiar. It was Mark. He didn't move when they entered. Just stared out the window, his lips moving silently, eyes glassy. The light from Adam's flashlight reflected off something in his hands, a wooden bird whistle. Half-carved. Familiar. Adam stepped closer, heart lodged in his throat. "Mark," he said, voice cracking. "It's me. It's Adam." The man blinked slowly, like it took him a moment to process. Then his lips moved again, this time with sound. "I stayed." Tears burned down Adam's cheeks. "We found Lisa. We know what happened. But you're safe now. You can come home." Mark finally looked at him. "There is no home. Not anymore." Sheriff Holloway stepped forward. "Mark, we have people waiting outside. We're going to help you. You don't have to stay here." Mark shook his head. "The forest doesn't let you go. Not really. You think you leave, but it pulls you back. Always. I walked, but I never left." Adam knelt beside him. "Please, let us try. We can break the cycle. Whatever this is, it ends tonight." Mark's hand slowly opened, revealing something small and rusted, a key. He placed it in Adam's palm. "She left something for you," he said. "Downstairs. In the floor." Back on the main level, they searched every inch until Adam found a loose board under the fireplace. Beneath it was a tin box, sealed tight. Inside was another letter. Lisa's handwriting again, but this one was different. Clearer. Hopeful. "If Mark finds this, it means you came back. And if Adam finds this, thank you. I knew someone would keep looking. You have to break the loop. Burn the cabin. Scatter the ashes beyond the ridge. Only then will it release him. Only then will the Watchers sleep again." Adam folded the letter with trembling hands. "We have to do it." Outside, the team gathered supplies. Holloway radioed for backup and set a perimeter, while Adam and two others poured kerosene around the cabin. Mark didn't resist. He stood quietly, watching them, whispering to himself under his breath. When they lit the first match, the fire caught fast. Flames licked up the dry beams and roared into the night sky. The air changed immediately. The forest groaned like something ancient had been disturbed. The wind shifted. Animals began to cry out in the distance. Mark's eyes filled with tears as he stepped back. "I stayed," he whispered again. "But maybe now, I can walk." As the fire consumed the walls, Adam led his brother away. For the first time in years, Mark didn't resist. He moved with them, slowly, uncertainly, like someone waking from a long, cruel dream. They stayed at the ridge until the flames died down to embers. Nothing remained but ash and smoke. The wind carried it far, just as Lisa's letter had asked. The forest was still again. In the days that followed, everything changed. Mark was taken to a hospital, examined, and questioned. He remembered parts of it. Lisa's screams, the man with the spiral pendant, the deal. But most of it came in fragments. Dreams. He said the forest had held him in a space between places. A place where time didn't flow right. Where memories repeated until they became unbearable. The media swarmed the story. Groom reappears 12 years after vanishing. Burnett wedding mystery solved. But not everything made it into the headlines. The letters, the bunker, the spiral symbols. Those details stayed quiet, kept between the search team, the family, and the sheriff's office. But just when they thought it was over, the twist came. 1 week later, a ranger several miles north of Ashton reported something strange. A new structure had appeared overnight. A cabin, fresh wood, no trails leading to it, no footprints. Inside, it was empty except for a single item nailed to the wall. Another photo of Lisa. And underneath it, scratched deep into the wood, one stays. One walks. Holloway stood staring at the report, the photo evidence in hand, his gut turning. The cabin they burned was gone. Mark was safe. Lisa's memory had been honored. But whatever force had gripped this place, it hadn't truly left. The Watchers were still awake. And somewhere in that forest, something was building again. Mark stayed at the facility under light medical supervision for nearly 2 weeks. During the time, Adam visited him every day, slowly helping his brother rebuild pieces of himself. Some memories returned in clear detail. Mark remembered their wedding day, the way Lisa laughed during the rain, the car breaking down just outside Ashton. But other moments were fractured, out of order, as if time had been folded and shaken before being handed back to him. He often asked about Lisa with a faraway look in his eyes. When Adam finally told him about the journal, about her final days and her hope that someone would find her words, Mark just nodded. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat with it, holding the truth the way someone holds a stone they've been carrying too long. Sheriff Holloway quietly closed the case. There were no formal charges, no public trial, no deep forensic investigation that would poke at wounds best left settled. The official report said Mark Ellis had been found alive after disappearing during a hiking trip in 1985, suffering from long-term disorientation and isolation. Lisa Burnett was listed as a presumed victim of exposure. Most people accepted it. Some didn't. But no one pushed too hard. Too much time had passed, and those closest to it, like Adam, had no interest in reliving every detail for the world to dissect. The second cabin was demolished by forestry services within a week of its discovery. No one explained how it had appeared overnight, or why it bore no trace of tools, transportation, or construction work. No one could explain the spiral symbol carved into the inner beams, or the identical picture of Lisa mounted on the wall. The official response labeled it as a hoax, possibly the work of local vandals mimicking online stories for attention. But Holloway didn't believe that. Neither did Adam. They knew it wasn't over. Not fully. Whatever force had lingered in those woods wasn't bound to one structure, one path, or even one moment in time. It moved differently. It waited. After the quiet settled, Adam took Mark back home. Not to their childhood home, but to a small lakefront cabin their uncle once owned and left behind. It was calm there. Simple. Trees surrounded them, but they weren't the same forest. These trees felt alive in a normal way. Mark took to fishing in the mornings, sitting in silence most of the day, then going inside before sunset. He didn't speak much, but he smiled more than he used to. On good days, he'd hum old songs from their childhood, the kind their mother used to play on cassette. Adam stayed nearby, always within reach, knowing some things couldn't be fixed, but they could be carried. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, the world moved on. Still, Adam couldn't stop thinking about Lisa's journal. He had it kept in a sealed box at home, but every so often, he would open it and read a page. It never stopped feeling personal. Heartbreaking, but somehow comforting too. Her words had been more than a cry for help. They'd been a message of belief, a sign that even in fear, she'd held on to the hope that someone would come. And someone did. He also kept Lisa's final note, the one they found with the key and the instruction to burn the cabin on his nightstand. One night, he noticed something he hadn't before. In the corner, nearly invisible under the aging paper, were initials, J.W. Jonah Wills. The same name from Holloway's old file. The cartographer who vanished in 1982. The man whose notes had matched the carvings. Somehow, he and Lisa had crossed paths, even if only indirectly. Maybe he had left her a message. Or maybe she found his journal and used his words. Either way, it meant there had been others. Others who had touched the edge of whatever force that forest held. Maybe some made it out. Maybe most didn't. It gave Adam a strange kind of peace. Not closure, exactly, but understanding. What happened to Mark and Lisa wasn't random. It wasn't some freak accident or misstep into danger. It was part of something older, something larger than one couple, one night, one disappearance. The forest had held secrets long before the Bonnets ever stepped into it. And it probably still did. But for now, the cycle was broken. One morning in late fall, Mark handed Adam a carved wooden bird. It was finished. Smooth, detailed, shaped with care. Adam recognized it immediately. Lisa had one just like it, given to her by Mark before their wedding. She'd always called it her lucky charm. This one was identical, down to the tiny line along the tail feather. Mark said, "She deserved more than what I gave her. But she gave me something back. Enough to keep walking." Adam just nodded, placing the bird on the mantel by the window. Later that day, Mark asked to visit the site one last time. The cabin site. Adam hesitated, but something in his brother's eyes told him it was important. They made the drive in silence, parked at the trailhead, and walked in together. When they arrived, there was nothing left, just a patch of earth that looked untouched. No ash, no charred wood. Even the grass had grown back. Mark stood there for a long time, then knelt and placed something on the ground. Lisa's earrings. He said nothing. Didn't cry. Just placed them gently, then stood and walked back toward the trail. That night, the wind in the trees seemed quieter, calmer, as if the woods had taken something in and finally settled. Adam thought about all the lives touched by this strange, painful story, about the questions they might never answer, about the mysteries still tangled in the branches of those trees, but also about the love that had endured between Mark and Lisa, between brothers, between memory and hope, and how that love, even in the darkest places, had been strong enough to carry someone home. Sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes, it reaches out not to haunt us, but to remind us of what matters. In the end, the forest would keep its secrets, but the story of Mark and Lisa Burnett wouldn't be forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.